had some disappointing reads before then, but that was the first truly awful book that I read. If any of these books brought even a semblance of joy to your life, that is awesome, and I am so happy for you. That was just definitely not the case for me. Hi friends, it's Lexa. Today we are going to go over some of my worst books in 2022. Here's the thing, I read over 200 books last year, so there are bound to be some that just don't vibe with me. Quick disclaimer, of course, that none of this is to say that these books are objectively bad. What works for me might not work for you, and vice versa. I never go into a book hoping that I don't like it. That doesn't bring me any joy. But I know personally I love watching these videos. It really helps me to understand someone's reading preferences. Like, we might like the same things. What am I trying to say? But we might differ in our taste of which books we don't enjoy. I've decided to differentiate between the worst books that I read and the most disappointing books that I read. This one is going to be the worst ones, and then there's going to be a video on my most disappointing, which might not necessarily be the worst books that I read. They were just really disappointing, whether I had high expectations for it or heard really good things and something just didn't work for me. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the worst books that I read in 2022. The first one I want to talk about is A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham. Thank you, Oliver. You have some things to say as well. We don't need to eat the box. This book is about our main character, Chloe Davis, who when she was younger, her dad confessed to the murders of 6 girls who had gone missing in her town. Flash forward 20 years later, she's about to get married, she's a local psychologist, and girls start to go missing in a very similar fashion to how they were when she was younger. Listen, I'm not the best at guessing plot twists. I've read a lot of thrillers, and only one of them made it on my best books of the year. I don't tend to love them, especially I think I've learned that I really am not a huge fan of domestic thrillers. This would probably be perfect if you want something to just speed through and you're very new to thrillers. But for me, I'm not very good at guessing plot twists, and I guessed the plot twist of this book on page 18. 18. And sometimes it's like, oh, I think that this might be it, but we'll see, and I get thrown off. No, I was like, sure. And I just kept reading because I was so hoping that it wasn't gonna be that and something was just gonna pull the rug out from underneath me. No. And I'm okay if I guess a plot twist if the rest of the book makes up for it, but this was just so boring. But for me, it just didn't work at all, and I'm really sad because I still would have considered picking up another book from this author, but I've seen a few reviews and people said that if you don't like this, you probably aren't gonna like her newest book that just came out, so this author might just not work for me. The next book is An Enchantment of Ravens. This is kind of like worst books, and it was also a little bit disappointing. Fantasy books are some of my favorites, and for most of the year, specifically young adult fantasy was my fave. And I'd heard amazing things from multiple people about Margaret Rogerson, and I actually ended up really loving A Sorcery of Thorns, which I believe is the other book. But this one, An Enchantment of Ravens, I read first, and I couldn't even get through it. This is the only DNF that I have on this list, but I feel confident in the fact that it was not for me. I don't remember either one of the characters' names, which usually I don't, but let's see. So this is a YA romance between Isabel and Rook, set in a world where the immortal creatures can't do things like baking bread or painting or anything like artistry. They call it craft. Only the humans have that ability. So Isabel is a painter, and she often paints for these immortal creatures. But one day Rook comes by, wants his self-portrait done, and when she's finished painting it, it's an issue because she has painted mortal sorrow in his eyes. And this is a no-no because that is a weakness, and I think he's like the prince or something, and that could cost him the throne. This happens like very quickly, and then he just like drags her along on this quest, which I like quests, but I have figured out about my taste. I do not like fantasy books where most of the plot is them traveling from one location to another. I would rather just skip over that part, okay? All they do is they walk, they talk, there's a little bit of a scruffle. People come and shake things up, they get into a fight. I don't know what the word is that I'm thinking of. There's some conflict, they walk some more, they talk some more. And about 75% through the talking and walking and scruffling, I just couldn't do it anymore. I did not care about either one of these characters. I hated Rook. There was absolutely nothing redeeming about that man. And this one I believe was even shorter than A Sorcery of Thorns, and I couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. However, if you are interested in Margaret Rogerson and you want a fantasy standalone, which is why I read this one, I definitely recommend her other book versus An Enchantment of Ravens. Number 3 on this list is Lore Olympus. And look, no one is sadder about this than I am. This book is gorgeous. Gorgeous, okay? The art in here is stunning. Purples and pinks, that's my jam, okay? Absolutely beautiful. I gave this book a 2-star only for the beautiful art. The story itself, solid 1-star for me. I will admit, I don't know a lot about Greek mythology, but I love, generally, Hades and Persephone retellings, which is what this is. Neon Gods like got me back into reading last year, like a little bit. To dip my toes in the water, I took a break. But that was like the first book that I remember really liking in a long time, which is another Hades and Persephone retelling. So when people kept talking this book up, I was like, oh my god, yes, absolutely. It's gonna look beautiful on my shelf. Nothing happened. Okay, this is not like it's a graphic novel. It's quicker to get through, but like, it's large and in charge, and nothing happened. I also just didn't like this version of Hades and Persephone. I totally understand why people love it, but I'm just starting to realize that I don't think graphic novels are my thing. I loved Heartstopper. It was on my favorite books of the year. After that, after I read Heartstopper, I thought maybe I could get into graphic novels, and I just have yet to find one that sparks that same joy. But even if this was not a graphic novel, the story itself, no. Absolutely not. Next on this list is The Silence by Dawn DeLillo. Now I will admit I went into this with no expectations. This came out of a month that I was doing a month-long read-along where I was trying to read a bunch of like short little books. So I was watching a lot of videos on YouTube about shorter novellas. This was at the beginning of the year where I hadn't really gotten too much into reading yet. I hadn't really established what I like and what I didn't like in books. And again, nothing happened. There seems to be a vibe. But I also do want to note that there are tons of books that I absolutely love that were some of my favorites this year where you could also argue that nothing happened. I would call the writing pretentious. Like maybe I'm just not smart enough to understand it, but I think highly of myself. I think I'm decently intelligent, and maybe the point of this book went right over my head, but I don't think so. We're following a few different people, and you can tell something is happening outside in the world. Things are shutting down, planes are not taking off, something eerie is happening, but we're just like in this person's apartment with like a few friends, and you find out nothing. And I'm fine with that if I get a chance to fall in love with the characters or see their like a slice of life. I don't remember a single character from this book or a single thing that happened, and it is very short. And if this book was trying to make a statement, I don't know what it was. I remember a scene with like someone watching football, I think. It was a short book, so I didn't waste any of my time on it, but I had some disappointing reads before then, but that was the first truly awful book that I read. Really the first book of the year that I was like, wow, that was awful. I had some disappointing reads before then, but that was the first truly awful book that I read. Next up is The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. So this book I actually read pretty recently within the last month for a book club. I will admit this is not something that right now I typically would have picked up. I had it in my head that this was fantasy. Thank God. Something in my mind was like, maybe you should make sure it's not fantasy before you go into that thinking that. So I Googled it because I would have spent most of this book wondering where the magic was gonna start coming in. It's not fantasy. It's like a mystery. I will say things happened in this book, and I think that this is an easily recommendable book. So don't let the fact that I didn't like it necessarily turn you off. It just absolutely did not work for me. Avery gets called to this mansion because she finds out some guy she never met died, and in his willed like pretty much everything to her, with the stipulation that she has to survive in his mansion home with his family there, who's not getting the inheritance they thought that they were going to get, for a year. Our main girl Avery, she's really down on her luck. She's been like living in a car, living with her half-sister some of the time, is like, okay, I'm in. And the premise of that sounds so cool. This could definitely also be like a disappointing book had it not been for the fact that I knew at the time that this probably wasn't gonna work for me, because I started reading some reviews and figured out it probably wasn't. There's a love triangle aspect in here that I didn't like. I was getting really confused by a lot of the characters. I kept getting them mixed up in my head because they seemed so similar. And this had the opportunity to have conversations along the lines of the Hunger Games, of class systems and the wealth taking advantage of the poor. And I can't go too in depth in it because it would be a spoiler, but the fact that this went where it did and then didn't have those conversations felt odd to me, even though this is why I still think you can have those conversations, especially if you're setting up a plot that like so clearly should have those conversations. And also, I totally understand this is part of a series, you've got to have a little bit of a cliffhanger, but I think I prefer when books in a series still have some sort of ending, something wrapped up for us, and this was just like nothing but cliffhangers. Nothing felt resolved at all, and I hated that, especially because I don't care enough about this book to ever continue. But I did attend a book club on this and tons of people really loved it. So if you just want something that is like fun and fast-paced and is going to keep you kind of invested, that you can fly through, this does have really short chapters, which I loved. They're like a few pages each. I read this literally in a day before the book club because I decided the day of that I was going to attend the book club. So it's super easy to get through. If you're looking for something like that, something that might like get you kind of out of a reading slump, get you back into the swing of things, this might be the book for you, but I just don't think that this kind of like young adult mystery book works for me, especially when adult mystery doesn't seem to work that well for me apparently, even though I just keep reading them. Speaking of YA books that don't work for me, the next one I want to talk about is the series The Prison Healer. Now I will say I went into this thinking it was a standalone. I thought I had seen this book mentioned on the videos I had watched about YA fantasy standalones. It's not as a series. Now this might be my fault because I didn't particularly love the first book. However, I liked it, it was okay. But the cliffhanger at the end, that plot twist, got me to keep reading. Like she knows how to rope you in, okay? So my issues specifically fall in book 3. Books 1 and 2 were like meh for me, but I kept going, hoping it would get better. Who is our main girl? Kiva. So book 1 follows 17-year-old Kiva, who has spent the last 10 years of her life in Zalendov, which is this prison in this fantasy world. Kiva works as the prison healer, healing the guards and also the other prisoners there. A few things happen and the Rebel Queen ends up being captured, and it is on Kiva to keep her alive. So the Rebel Queen is set to have to go through this like trial system that she's definitely gonna die in, okay? Because she already came not doing so hot to the prison. And these are like the trial by ordeal. People don't survive them, okay? But since Kiva needs to keep the Rebel Queen alive, she goes and volunteers in her place. Throughout the entire series, there is this conversation around addiction, what it looks like in this world, and the effect that it has on the people. And in book 3, the way that that is handled, I don't want to say anything specific because I don't want to go into spoilers, but it really pissed me off how that was handled in the book, and nothing else made up for that. Okay, the whole series was kind of like meh, except for the plot twist she's good at the end of the books, but it wasn't enough to be able to look past everything else that I didn't like. I was not a fan of the love interest. I listened to this on audiobook, which is really the only reason that I saw it through to the end, but I really wish that I hadn't. And finally, for the last worst book that I read in 2022 is The It Girl by Ruth Ware. There was no reason for this book to be so fucking long. Thankfully, I had the audiobook. There's no way I would have kept going in this book if it wasn't for the fact that it was a Literally Dead book club pick, or it was some book club pick, and I had the audiobook. I don't always have to like characters. In fact, I like when authors can make me not like unlikable characters, because then they're doing like their job, right? Like if I feel very passionately about a character one way or the other, I'm in for that. This was just filled with characters that not only did I not like them, but I was like, I don't give a shit about you. This book follows our girl Hannah, who back when she was in college, her roommate April was killed. And Hannah was the main reason why this one guy got convicted of her murder. It was her testimony that put him in there. Years later, she's pregnant with a child, and she has reason to believe that maybe he was not the person who killed her roommate. We spend 95% of this book just with characters I don't care about, and I honestly just couldn't care less about Hannah either. It's told in dual timelines, today versus when she was at college. I was getting the characters so confused that it took me a while to even realize what the twist was. So for me, this was such a bleh. And just overall, another thriller that didn't work for me and was way too long for no reason. My camera's about to die, but that is it for today's video of the worst books that I read in 2022. Let me know down in the comments what were some of your worst or most disappointing books. Were any of these books your favorites? Tell me what, convince me, please, I would love it. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.